Zihuatanejo, Mexico. May 3rd, 1975. After dropping off passengers at this seaport town on the Pacific coast, pilot Carlos de los Santos embarks on a return trip to Mexico City in his Piper PA-24 Comanche. The weather conditions are clear and visibility is good as de los Santos cruises at 10,000 feet. 1 hour into the flight, he witnesses something unusual. A gray, wingless object off the left side of his plane.
And as he approaches Mexico City, he notices basically a small flying saucer just above his left wing. It's not as large as his aircraft, and he's flying a fairly small aircraft, and he's like, what is this? And then he looks over to his right, and he sees another one. And then he looks ahead of them, and there's one coming at him. It goes below his aircraft, and he feels a bump under his aircraft. And he's scared out of his mind. Anyone would be. He then realizes that he's not really in control of his aircraft. His aircraft is moving in a way that seems to respond to these objects, not to him.
He goes to move the yoke, and the yoke is moving on itself. The plane starts climbing to 3,000 meters. That's the ceiling of the Piper. If it climbs any further, it will stall out. He will lose control. The plane will fall out of the sky.
He's actually becoming afraid because his cabin's not pressurized. You get to a certain altitude, he's going to have a hard time breathing.
The theory is that the UFO that came under the plane took control of his plane. And the UFO's own magnetic envelope is lifting the plane higher and higher and higher. So Los Santos is in a panic. He's giving mayday calls.
He's telling them, there are these unidentified objects at my wingtips and below me, and I don't know what to do.
As the private plane races towards a mountainous area, the 3 UAPs disengage from Carlos's plane and veer off toward the Mount Popocatépetl volcano at lightning speed. As the objects disappear from sight, Carlos regains control of the plane. But he quickly realizes his ordeal isn't over.
He can't initiate his landing gear because of the impact that one of these objects made on his aircraft. He has to circle around the airport about 10 times, and he uses a screwdriver to push the lever to get his landing gear to come down. And he successfully lands his aircraft. It's kind of an amazing thing there. So he lands his aircraft, and the story doesn't end here. Now, he would have had his whole career reputation ruined probably with this, except for the fact that Mexican air traffic control tracked these objects also, and this came out to support him. This story became a huge news story in Mexico. Didn't really make much impact in the United States, but it was a very big story in Mexico.
Years later, De Los Santos revealed that in the aftermath of the event, he was twice approached by mysterious figures, warning him not to speak about his experience. The first occasion was just before he was scheduled to be interviewed by a Mexican television station. The second happened when De Los Santos was set to meet with the famous UFO investigator, J. Allen Hynek.
Hynek was into the case. A lot of people were following this case. And just before he was going to meet with Hynek at some hotel, he gets another encounter from one of these men in black, these tall, pasty, white-skinned guys who warned him, don't talk about this. He was threatened. And he did actually stop talking about this for a little while after that, but as time went by, he's talked about it. It's just one of the most incredible aviation UAP stories that you're ever going to hear, and he got out of it alive.
Pilot Carlos de los Santos, ultimately emerged from his harrowing Midair encounter unscathed. But similar confrontations between civilian planes and UFOs have led to tragic consequences, including injuries, crashes, and even loss of life. Yucca Flat, Nevada, May 19, 1953. At 5:05 a.m., one of a series of nuclear tests under the umbrella codenamed Upshot Knothole is set off. Within seconds of the blast, a disc-shaped object is seen rapidly descending from the sky, headed south toward Las Vegas, then disappearing into the mountains. Just 2 days after this event, government officials secretly gathered a team of scientists for a curious assignment. They were to investigate the crash of an unidentified flying object on the outskirts of Kingman, Arizona, a city 175 miles south of the nuclear test site.
There were 40 engineers that boarded a bus, and they took a long 3.5-hour ride from Phoenix to Kingman. When they got there, it was nighttime. There were MPs on all corners of the craft. It's about a 40-foot diameter disc-shaped craft that was perfectly intact. There wasn't a scratch on it. There were 4 beings associated with this craft, and they shipped it to Groom Lake.
Groom Lake is the Area 51 region in Nevada. When Area 51 was just bare bones, they took the craft and the aliens out to that location in the middle of the Nevada desert because it was so remote. And around that, they built Area 51.
Hidden within a ring of mountains deep in the Nevada desert, Area 51 is a top-secret military installation that has long been rumored to hold evidence of alien technology. And there are even stories that a special facility at Area 51 once held a survivor of the 1953 Kingman UFO crash, an alien entity known as J-Rod.
J-Rod is an alien who allegedly worked at Area 51 over a period of years, and it was J-Rod's mission or duty to help reverse engineer technology that was apparently from the 1953 Kingman UFO crash. J-Rod was one of the crash survivors and worked directly with our own government.
Captain Bill Uhouse, a former Navy pilot who later worked for the U.S. Air Force performing experimental testing on aircraft, was assigned to Area 51 in the mid-1960s. And he claims that he not only studied the craft that allegedly crashed in Kingman, Arizona, but also had direct contact with J-Rod.
We had a long period of introduction into meeting, an alien. And I called him J-Rod. That's the name that the linguist gave him. And he would talk, but he'd sound just like, if you spoke, he'd sound like you. He's like one of these, a parrot, but he'd try and answer your question, Basically, it was only engineering advice or science advice.
There's also another whistleblower by the name of Dan Burish. And Dan Burish said that he was hired as a microbiologist to basically care for J-Rod, ensuring that he remained healthy. And this went on for years and years and years.
According to Dan Burish and Bill Uhouse, J-Rod was housed in a special underground chamber at Area 51. And there have been numerous other accounts of extraterrestrials working with the United States government.
There's a lot of stories that we've worked with the aliens at Area 51, or some say at a base nearby, kind of in the desert out there. And we've been working with them in underground labs, and they have been sharing information for us to enhance our technologies.
Is it possible that the United States government has met with and worked with entities like J-Rod and other alien visitors since at least the 1950s. According to UFO researchers, there is evidence that extraterrestrials have not only been held at secret military bases, but have even met face-to-face with the commander-in-chief inside the walls of the Pentagon. Pilot Theo Chesley has reported one of the most significant and credible UFO sightings in recent Alaskan history. The incident caught the attention of author and researcher David Childress, who traveled to Anchorage to meet with Chesley and examine the evidence of his harrowing encounter.
Hi, Theo.
Hi, David. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I understand you have a very interesting story to tell.
Well, I do, and it happened right here in this aircraft.
You've been flying here for quite a few years, right?
Yeah, about 35 years.
So when was this first occurrence?
Well, we had a flight back in October 2019. We were northeast of the mountain. We were probably 30 miles from the mountain. We spotted something in the sky, and this is what we saw.
Did it seem to have a cloud around it, or no?
It had like a tail on it, a little bit of a wisp coming out of the back. So I'm looking at it going, okay, what is that? As we started to come towards the mountain and fly by it, this horizontal disc turned vertical and came over and sort of parked by the mountain and held its shape.
So it had been moving, and then it stopped.
It stopped by the volcano. So I'm like looking at it going, okay, if this is a smoke ring, it's not going to hold its shape. It's not going to stop. It's going to dissipate. It held its shape the whole time.
And had you ever seen anything like this before?
I'd been flying, 35 years and 15,000 hours of flight time, most of them in Alaska, and I had never seen anything like this. Then we had something fly out of the mountain. Now the mountain...
A second object.
A second object. So this object flies out of the mountain. And at the same time, we're still watching the sphere that's vertically parked.
And it's like up
It's
here.
right over here. As a matter of fact, I'll show you another picture here that kind of just puts it all together.
Okay.
Okay, so then this appeared on the side of the mountain. This green orb shows up on the side of the mountain in a lower spot. The next picture we take, this is what happened to the vertical sphere in the sky. Something flew inside of it and pulled it out of shape. You see these two little, I don't know, there's like two little wings out there. And we like looked at that and I said, no, we're done here. We are leaving the scene here. And to be honest, my concern level was going about through the roof at that point.
Did it seem like a very large object then?
This is a big mountain, and this was something that caught our eye 40 to 50 miles away.
Okay, that's, it's like 40, 50 miles away.
So this had to be almost, I want to guess, half a mile wide.
Wow, that's fascinating. And, when it comes to UFO-type objects around volcanoes, that's a common thing.
One of the first modern UFO sightings on record involved an entire squadron of vehicles that appeared to enter a volcano. On June 24th, 1947, Kenneth Arnold was flying his private plane near Mount Rainier in Washington when he witnessed 9 disc-shaped objects move at an impossible speed across the horizon, then disappear into a nearby volcano called Mount Adams.
There has been a lot of UFO sightings around volcanoes. And we've seen this in the Canary Islands, in Mexico, in South America.
You have other places like, say, Mount Shasta. And we're seeing it in Hawaii, too, where UFOs are seen and there's a lot of activity.
I mean, it definitely makes you wonder, okay, what's in this volcano? What is the attraction here? And the crazy thing is this was just the first occurrence. We had a second occurrence.
Okay.
6 months later. I'm by myself in a different aircraft. And I looked out of my left window, and all of a sudden, there is a huge cloud formation that came out of nowhere.
And that's right, kind of above the volcano.
Above and east of the mountain. But I've never seen anything like this in my life.
It was a clear sky without anything, and suddenly you saw this.
Well, you saw the picture. That picture that I took, clear sky, was a minute before this decided to show up. So the crazy part is, this cloud morphed into several different shapes. There looks like something black inside there, an object underneath this thing.
Yeah.
During the occurrence, I had the aircraft on autopilot, and the aircraft was flying straight and true. My route of flight took me back by the mountain again. As I'm coming back, I have the aircraft on autopilot, and I look down and I notice I'm 35 degrees off course heading towards the mountain. I shut the autopilot off, reset the heading, set the airplane back up on course, and okay, yeah, we're fine. I'm looking around again, trying to see if there's anything, and I look down, and we're heading back towards the mountain again. It happened 2 times. So at that point I go, oh no, something's not right here. I'm gonna hand fly the aircraft. And worked fine, hand flying the airplane. But I've never had that happen to me on an autopilot, just pull the aircraft, you know, start pulling the aircraft somewhere where it's not supposed to be.
So the autopilot then was somehow sensing some weird magnetic thing and pulling you then out of...
Something internally in the aircraft was feeling a magnetic pull.
This sounds a lot like other things that have happened, like, say, in the Bermuda Triangle or something, like where their instruments do go haywire or they're being taken off, you know, course without even knowing it. And suddenly they vanish, right?
Very much so.
To me, this is a very important story. I'm so glad that you've been able to get these good photographs. You've got other witnesses. And for 70 years, there have been planes vanishing, even military planes. This all fits so squarely into the mystery, which is Alaska.
Alaska, November 17th, 1986. Japan Airlines Flight 1628 is carrying cargo from Paris, France to Narita International Airport near Tokyo. The 3-person crew is led by Captain Kenju Terauchi, an ex-fighter pilot with over 10,000 hours of flight time. As the 747 approaches Anchorage, Captain Terauchi notices 2 strange lights out of his cockpit window.
It's dark. It's very early morning before sunrise. These lights are clearly maneuvering. They are in relationship to each other. One is on top of the other, and they move directly in front of his aircraft. Now, he's flying at about 500 miles per hour. These things are pacing him.
Captain Terauchi realizes the lights are strange oval-shaped flying objects, and they're getting dangerously close to his aircraft. As bright lights fill the cockpit, Captain Terauchi radios the Anchorage Air Traffic Control Center and asks if they can identify the objects near his plane.
Okay, Santos, we're turning around 1628. Pick up any traffic, Federal Cook, Japan 1628 Heavy, negative. Japan 1628, Roger, and we inside 2 traffic, about Japan 1628, Roger, can you identify the aircraft? We are not sure, but we have traffic inside now.
As Terauchi attempts a series of evasive maneuvers to avoid a potential collision, the 2 UFOs suddenly disappear. In their place is another object. One so large, it dwarfs the 747.
His words for describing it were gigantic spaceship, the size of maybe 2 aircraft carriers, just immense. Terauchi sees this massive thing in the sky, and he's scared.
Concerned by Captain Terauchi's report, the air traffic controller calls NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, based at Elmendorf Air Force Base in Anchorage. Communication specialists at the airbase confirm that there is a very large, unidentified object on their radar screens.
Traffic control told them that they could actually take whatever evasive actions they needed to avoid collision, and they even dropped down to 4,000 feet above sea level, and the thing continued to follow them.
Air traffic control diverted another commercial flight to come look at this UFO, and by the time they got there, UFO was completely gone.
One of the reasons why the JAL report is such a big deal is because the corroborating evidence is overwhelming. Not only are there eyewitness reports, but there's the records of the communication systems that Terauchi was in touch with. Actual dialogue that happened. Hey, we are up here. We see this. Are you guys seeing this on your radar? All this stuff is recorded.
Once safely grounded, Captain Terauchi, his co-pilot, and flight engineer were immediately interviewed by Alaska Federal Aviation Administration officials and other special agents.
There's an FAA investigation into this. There's lots of documentation. There's no real hard and fast conclusion about this. And so the pilot, perhaps out of frustration, talks to the media.
In December 1986, 1 month after the encounter, Captain Terauchi contacted Kyoto News and said he believed the mysterious crafts were of extraterrestrial origin. The unauthorized statements prompted Japan Airlines officials to remove Captain Terauchi from pilot duty and assign him to a desk job. Around the same time, John Callahan, the FAA's Division Chief of the Accidents and Investigations Branch, learned of the incident and deemed it worthy of investigation.
John Callahan went to DC about this, and there was a meeting that was chaired by one of the top people of the FAA. This meeting was also attended by representatives of the FBI, representatives of the CIA, and representatives of President Reagan's White House. They had audio tapes that were played between the pilot and air traffic control describing everything that was happening, and written reports. And at the end of the meeting, one of the CIA agents stood up and said, "This meeting never happened, and we're confiscating all of the data that has been shared here." Now, Callahan, he was a little sly, but he was within his rights. "They never asked me," he said, "if I had a copy of any of this myself." He said, which I did. He had a copy of the audio recordings, if nothing else, and a little over a decade later shared that with the public.
John Callahan came away with the feeling that there was essentially a kind of cover-up. The FAA didn't want the fact that this incident had occurred to get out.
I've spoken to pilots who have seen amazing things out there, but never reported because of the fear of being disbelieved, being ridiculed, and perhaps being grounded. You won't be flying anymore. So what did they say? Most times, nothing.
You have countless commercial and private airline pilots who spend an exorbitant amount of time up in the sky. And in my opinion, I think they're the best people to discern what is natural and what is not.
As far as ancient astronaut theorists are concerned, UFO encounters reported by civilian pilots provide some of the most compelling evidence that there is an extraterrestrial presence in the skies above Earth. And according to some pilots, what they've witnessed presents a serious danger. Mexico City, beneath the current-day capital of Mexico, lie the ruins of the ancient Aztec metropolis known as Tenochtitlan. The Aztecs dominated much of central Mexico from the 14th to the 16th century AD. And Tenochtitlan is considered to be their first official settlement. An incredibly sophisticated city featuring a grid system of canals and causeways. But according to their historical texts, the Aztec civilization did not originate here.
The Aztecs say they started from this place up in the north called Chiquimostoc. It was a cave, and inside that cave it had 7 different caverns. And there were said to be 7 different tribes. And the Aztecs say they were part of the 7 tribes that came from the 7 chambers of Chiquimostoc.
While Chiquimostoc was once thought to be a mythological place, some scholars believe archaeological evidence suggests that it really did exist and is located at the site of the ancient pyramid complex known today as Teotihuacan.
The place of 7 caves, we think maybe that has actually been located archaeologically at the site of the main temple of Teotihuacan, called the Pyramid of the Sun, which sits just north of the Valley of Mexico. Underneath it is actually a cave with 7 different spots that it extends out into. And that's where the Aztecs said their original ancestors came from.
In the 16th century, Spanish chronicler Geronimo de Mendieta recorded the legends of the local native population. According to their accounts, the Aztec believed that they were fashioned by a group of stranded gods within these 7 caves.
Mendieta wrote an account of Aztec legend. In this report, he describes a giant flint knife landing on the earth, and the earth was trembling and shaking as this enormous flint knife landed. Then some 1,600 gods disgorged from this thing, and they are responsible for launching Aztec civilization.
The Aztecs talk about the many gods coming down to earth and creating humans. They create them out of bone, ash, and their own blood, and they make them somewhat in their own image, but they make them specifically so that they will honor them and they will serve them.
All of a sudden, there is a description of a giant flint knife that descended from the sky, and somebody emerged out of it. One has to wonder whether or not our ancestors were witness to a landing of some type of a craft. If so, then the Aztec story suggests that at some point in our history, extraterrestrials created mankind. And something very strange was going on at Teotihuacan.
Located just 30 miles northeast of Mexico City, the Teotihuacan complex encompasses nearly 8 square miles and is dated to the 1st century AD. It is the oldest and most sophisticated city of Mesoamerica, an area that extends from northern Mexico down through Central America. The civilization predated the Maya by at least 100 years. At its peak, it was said to have supported nearly 100,000 residents. It was also the largest city in the entire Western Hemisphere prior to the 15th century, and served as the major commerce and religious center for the region.
The significance of Teotihuacan cannot be overstated. It is the Rome of Mesoamerica. The things that Teotihuacan did set the pattern for all other city-states after it.
The central features of the complex are 2 large pyramids, known as the Pyramid of the Sun and the Pyramid of the Moon, as well as a temple dedicated to Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. These structures stand alongside a thoroughfare referred to as the Avenue of the Dead. Over 200 smaller buildings, platforms, and pyramids are found adjacent to the avenue. And there are thousands of living quarters just outside the complex. But as incredible as Teotihuacan is, no one knows exactly who built this metropolis or what happened to its occupants.
Teotihuacan, despite its size, has no hieroglyphs whatsoever. There are other cultures in Mesoamerica that were using writing systems. There's nothing like that at Teotihuacan. So we don't really have a clear history of what happened at Teotihuacan, and we can't really find evidence of their rulers.
We don't know who were the original Teotihuacanos. We don't know where they came from. We do not know how they were able to develop a complete, huge, complex citadel in the middle of nowhere and able to sustain thousands of inhabitants.
We have such a sophisticated site that embodies engineering principles, craftsmanship, art. Where did it originate? Where are the smaller versions of this? Well, we don't find any. So we don't have a progression, an evolution to show where this came from. So we have to ask, where did it come from?
We become conditioned to look at these awesome works of stone architecture and think, oh, primitive people did that, and they used primitive methods with primitive technology. But we have to rethink the fundamental assumptions and come to a greater and greater level of understanding that the technology required to build these artifacts, in fact, is greater than anything that they possessed.